So you've created your song, you bounce it, you send it out in the world, you close your project, and then for some reason you want to go back to it 3 months later, 1 year later, 5 years later, 10 years later. You want to export that vocal. You want to get that snare sound that you created. If you've ever seen a message like this, or like this, or like this, when you try and open a project, that means you really need to watch this video, because I'm gonna show you how to never be that person that gets these messages when you open old projects. This video was inspired by one of my reels on Instagram, where I had many people sending me questions and comments, and I thought I'd make a video on YouTube as well about this, because I think the number one thing that everyone should do when they finish a project, when they finish a song, is back it up properly. And I've already made videos in the past about how to properly back up projects in Cubase, but this applies to pretty much every DAW out there. So I'm going to show you what I do every single time I finish a project. I just finished mixing and mastering my latest single. It's already out, and I'm going to show you the entire process. The first thing that you have to always assume is that any plugin that you have in your project, whether it's an audio plugin or an instrument, is potentially not going to be recallable after a while. It could be a month, it could be 1 year, it could be 10 years, but at some point, most plugins either stop being supported or they have new versions to support newer operating systems, and then their settings might not translate. So there's always a very high chance, actually it's almost certain, that the plugins that you're using right now, you're not going to be able to use them later on. So the first thing you need to do is, before you call your track finished, go into your projects. Do this. Don't be lazy. Don't make this mistake. I've done this mistake many times in the past, and I have productions that I've done and I can't go back to the project because Contact 4 is not available, or Contact 2 is not available, or Orange Vocoder is not available. You know what I mean? All plugins eventually will stop being supported. So the first thing that I do, and I'm going to show how I do this in Cubase, but if you're working with another DAW, there might be a way, or it might be more difficult, and I know that for some DAWs this is going to be more difficult. Follow my workflow and you're going to be absolutely fine. What I'm doing is I'm going right here on my project and I show only the audio tracks. And I'm doing this because I want to render all the audio tracks and the instrument tracks in audio. This means that everything that's in this specific track, like the plugins, the effects, everything is going to be rendered in audio. Then what I do is I select all these audio channels. I click the first one, and then I go to the last one, hold Shift and click, and now all of them are selected. And then I hit Shift R on my keyboard, or if you don't have this shortcut, you can go Edit and go Render in Place, Render Settings. And then what I'm doing is I'm going to render the tracks. If you see render events here, that means you have selected an event right here, and that's why it's going to render the specific event that you've selected. So make sure you have nothing selected right here in your project area. This way we're rendering the entire track. And what I'm doing is I'm using the channel settings. So I'm including, like it says, the insert effects, the EQ, the channel settings, everything. Then what I do is I disable the source track. So let's say if there's a vocal that has a compressor, an EQ, a reverb, or anything like that, this channel is going to be disabled and it's going to be hidden because I also tick the hide source tracks. And when you do this, you get two benefits. Number one, you have the audio no matter what with all the processing, okay? But if you want to open the project 3 months later and you still can open those plugins that you've used, the hidden channel is still going to be there with all the plugins. So you have the audio file rendered and the channel with all the settings, just in case if you want to use it and if you can open your plugins. So I hit render and that's what it does. And then I can bring back everything else, my VCA tracks, my effects tracks, and everything is right there. And once you do this, you will see that you have, for example, my kick drum, which is my render version, but I also have hidden tracks. And if I go here, for example, this is my kick that comes from my Modern 80s Kit Max. By the way, if you want to support the channel, if you like this video, you can check it out. And if you like it, make some great music with it. But that's what I've used on my latest single. And as you can see, my MIDI is still there. And all the effects that I've used for this kick drum are still there. I have the other channel right there, but if I want to hide it, I can just hide it like this. But now I also have a rendered file, which is audio and can be opened in any DAW, anytime, anywhere. The second thing that I do, and I've already made a video about this, I'm going to link it right here because it's very possible that you might have missed it, is I back up the Cubase project. So what I do is I go File, Backup Project, and then what I'm doing is I'm selecting a folder. It has to be an empty folder, and then I create a project name. I don't make the direct offline processing permanent. You might want to remove unused files though if you want to clean up the project. Most of the times I want to back up the video if I'm doing film composing, and I want to back up my mixdown folder as well. Then you click OK, and then Cubase creates a new folder and a brand new project for you that contains pretty much everything that you need for this project. The third thing I always do is I go to File, Export, Audio Mixdown, and this is where Cubase is really powerful. I know of no other DAW that can do this the way that Cubase does it so quickly as well. Right here, I basically go into the channel selection and I'm going to export everything again with multiple settings. I'm going to show you what I mean. So I go multiple and I make sure I select all the group channels. So now I have all the group channels in audio. They're going to be bounced in audio. So I'm going to have full flexibility. If I want to just process my drums, I can just bring this audio into my DAW and I'm going to have the group of the drums right there, the bass breakdown. As you can see, I have lots of basses right there, and I always like to add a symbol before all the basses, and this way I always know that this is a group because I always have the same symbol on my group channels. Then I'm going to export my effects channels. Again, this is very important. I want to bounce all the reverb separately. If I want to later on do a dry version, I can do this by having this control right there. And I also bounce all my audio channels, and there are a lot of them. And what I'm doing next is I'm going here, I'm adding a name, and then I'm creating a specific naming scheme. So in this case, Cubase will generate files that are going to look like this. So the number of the file, the name. I also like to add my BPM on my file names. It's going to show me the channel type, so I know straight away if this is a group channel or an audio channel or an instrument channel, and so on and so forth. And I hit OK, and I can see a preview of one of the names. Then I choose my file type, WAV. This project was recorded at 48 kilohertz. 24-bit depth, and then we come to the secret. What I'm going to do is I'm going to export everything using all the effects. So compression, EQ, anything that's on every channel as a plugin is going to be bounced. This is a second layer of protection and safety. So I know I've done this inside the project, but I also want to make sure I have this as an export, because here we're also exporting the group channels and the effects channels, which is something you cannot do with the render function as of yet. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add this to a queue, and as you can see, this has the inserts and the strip, and I'm going to do a second version with all the effects disabled, dry. This way, I'm exporting all the audio. So let's say you have a vocal that's been edited and you've done lots of edits, but you want this completely dry without any effects, so you have the original recording. This is what this option is going to do for you. So I'm going to do disable dry as well, and I'm going to add that to a queue. And as you can see now, I have with all the effects, with dry, and if you want to be even more careful and have more control, you can also say, I want to export all the channels individually. So let's say you have a vocal bus that contains a lead vocal and two more vocals on the sides that you've spread across the panorama. What this function will do is it will give you a version of that vocal going through its insert effects and then going through the group channel and through the effects channels. So if you only want to have that vocal with all the processing throughout the chain, this is going to give you this result for that specific vocal without taking into account anything else that's in the group channel. I hope that makes sense. It's a really, really powerful feature, and it gives you lots of flexibility if you want to create stems, if you want to do alternative versions later on and you cannot open the plugins. So if you want to, you can even add this to a queue. There you go. So now when I hit start queue export, I can go have a coffee, and Cubase is going to export 426 files for me just like that. As far as I know, there's no other DAW on the market right now that can do this so easily and with so many options. So if you're using Pro Tools, if you're using Logic, if you're using Ableton, you have to do some of these things manually, I'm afraid, but this is the only way to make sure that you will be able to open your precious projects, your precious music, years and years after you've finished your production. And of course, it goes without saying that you're going to have loads and loads of files generated after doing this process, but disk space is so cheap these days. And if your music means something to you, totally do this, because I've been there. It's really frustrating and it's really sad if you're not able to load projects that you created many years ago. I'm not able to open one of my very first albums that I produced, but to be honest with you, back then, doing all those things would require probably weeks of work for every track, because you had to bounce everything one by one. So it was a lot of work, and unless you had a super important project, most people wouldn't do it. But now, my friends, there's no excuse. Do this every single time. It takes 15 minutes of your time. Cubase does it super easily, and it's totally worth it. If you found this useful and you like what I do and you want to support the channel, please check out my Modern 80s Kit Max, or you can check out my mastering courses. I've done them with a lot of love, and I'm sure you're going to love them. You can use the join button, you can use the thanks button, or just leave the old good like and subscribe. That's more than enough. And you might also enjoy watching this video or this video. Thank you so much, my friends. Have fun. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.